The grey whale is a baleen whale that migrates between feeding and breeding grounds yearly. It reaches a length of 14.9 meters, a weight of 36 tons, and lives between 55 and 70 years. The common name of the whale comes from the grey patches and white mottling on its dark skin. Grey whales were once called devilfish because of their fighting behavior when hunted. The grey whale is the sole living species in the genus Eschrichtius, which in turn is the sole living genus in the family Eschrichtiidae. This mammal descended from filter-feeding whales that developed at the beginning of the Oligocene, over 30 million years ago. The grey whale is distributed in an eastern North Pacific population and a critically endangered western North Pacific population. North Atlantic populations were extirpated on the European coast before 500 AD and on the American coast around the late 17th to early 18th centuries. However, on May 8, 2010, a sighting of a grey whale was confirmed off the coast of Israel in the Mediterranean Sea, leading some scientists to think they might be repopulating old breeding grounds that have not been used for centuries. In May and June 2013 a grey whale was sighted off the coast of Namibia, the first confirmed in the Southern Hemisphere. The round-trip journey of one grey whale has set a new record for the longest mammal migration, covering a distance of more than 22,000 kilometers across the Pacific Ocean. Her migration has shown new insight into how endangered species are making drastic changes in their lifestyle. Taxonomy. The grey whale is traditionally placed as the only living species in its genus and family. Recent DNA analysis indicates certain rorquals of the family Balaenopteridae, such as the humpback whale, Ngaptera novaeunlii, and fin whale, Balaenoptera physalis, are more closely related to the grey whale than they are to some other rorquals, such as the minke whales. John Edward Gray placed it in its own genus in 1865, naming it in honor of zoologist Daniel Eschricht. The common name of the whale comes from its coloration. The subfossil remains of now extinct grey whales from the Atlantic coasts of England and Sweden were used by Gray to make the first scientific description of a species then surviving only in Pacific waters. The living Pacific species was described by Cope as Rhachyonectes glaucus in 1869. Skeletal comparisons showed the Pacific species to be identical to the Atlantic remains in the 1930s, and Gray's naming has been generally accepted since. Although identity between the Atlantic and Pacific populations cannot be proven by anatomical data, its skeleton is distinctive and easy to distinguish from that of all other living whales. Many other names have been ascribed to the grey whale, including desert whale, devilfish, greyback, mussel digger and ripsack. The name Eschrichtius gibboses is sometimes seen. This is dependent on the acceptance of a 1777 description by Exleben. Description: the grey whale has a dark slate grey color and is covered by characteristic grey-white patterns, scars left by parasites which drop off in its cold feeding grounds. Individual whales are typically identified using photographs of their dorsal surface and matching the scars and patches associated with parasites that have fallen off the whale or are still attached. Grey whales measure from 4.9 meters in length for newborns to 13 m for adults. Newborns are a darker grey to black in color. A mature grey whale can reach 40 t, with a typical range of 15 33 t. They have two blowholes on top of their head, which can create a distinctive V-shaped blow at the surface in calm wind conditions. Notable features that distinguish the grey whale from other mysticetes include its baleen that is variously described as cream, off-white, or blonde in color and is unusually short. Small depressions on the upper jaw each contain a lone stiff hair, but are only visible on close inspection. Its head's ventral surface lacks the numerous prominent furrows of the related rorquals, instead bearing 2 to 5 shallow furrows on the throat's underside. The grey whale also lacks a dorsal fin, instead bearing 6 to 12 dorsal crenulations, which are raised bumps on the midline of its rear quarter, leading to the flukes. This is known as the dorsal ridge. The tail itself is 3 m across and deeply notched at the center while its edges taper to a point. Morphologic differences between two Pacific groups other than DNA structures, notable differences in proportions of several body parts and body colors including skeletal features, and length ratios of flippers and baleen plates have been confirmed between eastern and western populations, and some claims that the original eastern and western groups would have been much more distinct than previously thought, enough to be counted as subspecies. Since the original Asian and Atlantic populations have become seemingly extinct, it is difficult to figure the unique features among whales in these stocks. However, there have been observations of some whales showing distinctive, blackish body colors in recent years. Populations North Pacific equals 2 Pacific Ocean populations are known to exist, one of not more than 130 individuals whose migratory route is presumed to be between the Sea of Okhotsk and southern Korea, and a larger one with a population between 20,000 and 22,000 individuals in the eastern Pacific traveling between the waters off Alaska and Baja California's shore. The western population is listed as critically endangered by the IUCN. No new reproductive females were recorded in 2010, resulting in a minimum of 26 reproductive females being observed since 1995. Even a very small number of additional annual female deaths will cause the subpopulation to decline. North Atlantic The gray whale became extinct in the North Atlantic in the 18th century. They had been seasonal migrants to coastal waters of both sides of Atlantic, including the Baltic Sea, Wadden Sea, the Gulf of St. Lawrence, the Bay of Fundy, and Pamlico Sound. Radiocarbon dating of subfossil or fossil European coastal remains confirms this, with whaling the possible cause. Remains dating from the Roman epoch were found in the Mediterranean during excavation of the antique harbour of Latara near Montpellier in 1997, raising the question of whether Atlantic grey whales migrated up and down the coast of Europe from Wadden Sea to carve in the Mediterranean. Similarly, radiocarbon dating of American East coastal subfossil remains confirm grey whales existed at least through the 17th century. This population ranged at least from Southampton, New York, to Jupiter Island, Florida, the latest from 1675. In his 1835 History of Nantucket Island, Obed Macy wrote that in the early pre-1672 colony a whale of the kind called scrag entered the harbour and was pursued and killed by the settlers. A. B. Van Dins points out that the scrag whale, described by P. Dudley in 1725 as one of the species hunted by the early New England whalers, was almost certainly the grey whale. Pre-whaling abundance In 2007, S. Elizabeth Alter used a genetic approach to estimate pre-whaling abundance based on samples from 42 California grey whales, and reported DNA variability at 10 genetic loci consistent with a population size of 76,000 to 118,000 individuals, 3 to 5 times larger than the average census sizes measured through 2007. NOAA conducted a new population study in 2010 and 2011. Those data will be available by 2012. The ocean ecosystem has likely changed since the pre-whaling era, making a return to pre-whaling numbers infeasible. Many marine ecologists argue that existing grey whale numbers in the eastern Pacific Ocean are approximately at the population's carrying capacity. Connections between populations and possible recolonization Eastern and western populations, several whales seen off Sakhalin and on Kamchatka Peninsula are confirmed to migrate towards eastern side of Pacific and join the larger eastern population. In January 2011, a grey whale that had been tagged in the western population was tracked as far east as the eastern population range off the coast of British Columbia. Recent findings from either stranded or entangled specimens indicate that the original western population have become functionally extinct and possibly all the whales appeared on Japanese coast in modern times are vagrants or recolonizers from the eastern population. From North Pacific Ocean to outside of the Pacific, in mid-1980, there were 3 grey whale sightings in the eastern Beaufort Sea, placing them 585 kilometers further east than their known range at the time. Recent increases in sightings are confirmed in Arctic areas of the historic range for Atlantic stocks, most notably on several locations in the Laptev Sea including the New Siberian Islands in the East Siberian Sea, and around the marine mammal sanctuary of the Franz Josef Land, indicating possible earlier pioneers of recolonizations. These whales were darker in body color than those whales seen in Sea of Okhotsk. In May 2010, a grey whale was sighted off the Mediterranean shore of Israel. It has been speculated that this whale crossed from the Pacific to the Atlantic via the Northwest Passage, since an alternative route around Cape Horn would not be contiguous to the whale's established territory. There has been gradual melting and recession of Arctic sea ice with extreme loss in 2007 rendering the Northwest Passage fully navigable. The same whale was sighted again on May 30, 2010, off the coast of Barcelona, Spain. In May 2013, a grey whale was sighted off Walvis Bay, Namibia. Scientists from the Namibian Dolphin Project confirmed the whale's identity and thus provides the only sighting of this species in the Southern Hemisphere. Photographic identification suggests that this is a different individual than the one spotted in the Mediterranean in 2010. As of July 2013, the Namibian whale was still being seen regularly. Life history =reproduction =. Breeding behavior is complex and often involves 3 or more animals. Both male and female whales reach puberty at approximately 8 years of age. Females show highly synchronized reproduction, undergoing oostrus in late November to early December. During the breeding season, it is common for females to have several mates. This single ovulation event is believed to coincide with the special unregistered trademark annual migration patterns, when births can occur in warmer waters. Most females show biennial reproduction, although annual births have been reported. Males also show seasonal changes, experiencing an increase in testes mass that correlates with the time females undergo oostrus. Currently there are no accounts of twin births, although an instance of twins in utero has been reported. The gestation period for grey whales is approximately 1 or 2 months. In the latter half of the pregnancy, the fetus experiences a rapid growth in length and mass. Similar to the narrow breeding season, most calves are born within a 6-week time period in mid-January. The calf is born tail first, and measures about 4 meters in length. Females lactate for approximately 7 months following birth, at which point calves are weaned and maternal care begins to decrease. The shallow lagoon waters in which grey whales reproduce are believed to protect the newborn from sharks and orcas. Feeding The whale feeds mainly on benthic crustaceans, which it eats by turning on its side and scooping up sediments from the sea floor. It is classified as a baleen whale and as baleen, or whalebone, which acts like a sieve, to capture small sea animals, including amphipods taken in along with sand, water and other material. Mostly, the animal feeds in the northern waters during the summer, and opportunistically feeds during its migration, depending primarily on its extensive fat reserves. Calf grey whales drink 190 euro 300 US gal of their mother's 53% fat milk per day. The main feeding habitat of the western Pacific subpopulation is the shallow depth shelf off northeastern Sakhalin Island, particularly off the southern portion of Piltun Lagoon, where the main prey species appear to be amphipods and isopods. In some years, the whales have also used an offshore feeding ground in euro 35 m depth southeast of Chivo Bay, where benthic amphipods and Q machines are the main prey species. Some grey whales have also been seen off western Kamchatka, but to date all whales photographed there are also known from the Piltun area. Migration Eastern population. Each October, as the northern ice pushes southward, small groups of eastern grey whales in the eastern Pacific start a 2 to 3 month, 8,000 to euro 11,000 kilometers trip south. Beginning in the Bering and Truckeye Seas and ending in the warm water lagoons of Mexico's Baja California Peninsula and the southern Gulf of California, they travel along the west coast of Canada, the United States and Mexico. Traveling night and day, the grey whale averages approximately 120 km per day at an average speed of 8 km per hour. This round trip of 16,000 to euro 22,000 km is believed to be the longest annual migration of any mammal. By mid-December to early January, the majority are usually found between Monterey and San Diego such as at Morro Bay, often visible from shore. The whale-watching industry provides ecotourists and marine mammal enthusiasts the opportunity to see groups of grey whales as they migrate. By late December to early January, eastern greys begin to arrive in the calving lagoons of Baja California. The three most popular lagoons are Laguna Ojo de Libra, San Ignacio, and Magdalena. These first whales to arrive are usually pregnant mothers looking for the protection of the lagoons to bear their calves, along with single females seeking mates. By mid-February to mid-March, the bulk of the population has arrived in the lagoons, filling them with nursing, calving and mating gray whales. Throughout February and March, the first to leave the lagoons are males and females without new calves. Pregnant females and nursing mothers with their newborns are the last to depart, leaving only when their calves are ready for the journey, which is usually from late March to mid-April. Often, a few mothers linger with their young calves well into May. By late March or early April, the returning animals can be seen from Everett, Washington, to Puget Sound to Canada. Resident group a population of about 200 gray whales stay along the eastern Pacific coast from Canada to California throughout the summer, not making the farther trip to Alaskan waters. This summer resident group is known as the Pacific Coast Feeding Group. Any historical or current presence of similar groups of residents among the western population is currently unknown. Some of the better documented historical catches show that it was common for whales to stay for months in enclosed waters elsewhere, with known records in the Seto Inland Sea and the Gulf of Tsurup. Former feeding areas were once spread over large portions on mid-Honshu to northern Hokkaido. Some recent observations indicate that historic presences of resident whales are possible. A group of 2 or 3 were observed feeding in Azao Eschima in 1994 for almost a month. 2 single individuals stayed in Eyes Bay for almost 2 months in the 1980s and in 2012. The first confirmed living individuals in Japanese EEZ in the Sea of Japan and the first of living cow-calf pairs since the end of whaling stayed for about 3 weeks on the coastline of Terra do Mare in 2014. One of the pair returned to the same coasts at the same time of the year in 2015 again. Reviewing on other cases on different locations among Japanese coasts and islands observed during 2015 indicate that spatial or seasonal residences regardless of being temporal or permanental staying once occurred throughout many parts of Japan or on other coastal Asia. Western population. The current western gray whale population summers in the Sea of Okhotsk, mainly off Piltun Bay region at the northeastern coast of Sakhalin Island. There are also occasional sightings off the eastern coast of Kamchatka and in other coastal waters of the northern Okhotsk Sea. Its migration routes and wintering grounds are poorly known, the only recent information being from occasional records on both the eastern and western coasts of Japan and along the Chinese coast. The Sea of Japan was once thought not to have been a migration route, until several entanglements were recorded. Any records of the species had not been confirmed since after 1921 on Kyushu. However, there were numerous records of whales along the Genkai Sea off Yamaguchi Prefecture, in Ain Bay in the Gulf of Wakaza, and in Tsushima. Gray whales, along with other species such as right whales and bared-beaked whales, were common features off the northeastern coast of Hokkaido near Teshio, Ishikari Bay near Otaru, the Shakotan Peninsula, and islands in the Lapa Copyright Rouse Strait such as Ribun Island and Rishiri Island. These areas may also have included feeding grounds. There are shallow, muddy areas favorable for feeding whales off Shiratoko, such as at Shibetsu, the Notsuk Peninsula, Cape Ochishi on the Muro Peninsula, Mutsu Bay, along the Totori Sand Dunes, in the Suonada Sea, and Amura Bay. The historical calving grounds were unknown but might have been along southern Chinese coasts from Zhejiang and Fujian Province to Guangdong, especially near Hong Kong. Possibilities include Daya Bay, Whaler Harbour on Liuzhou Peninsula, and possibly as far south as Hainan Province and Guangxi, particularly around Hainan Island. These areas are at the southwestern end of the known range. It is unknown whether the whale's normal range once reached further south, to the Gulf of Tonkin. In addition, the existence of historical calving ground on Taiwan and Peng Islands, and any presence in other areas outside of the known ranges off Babuin Islands and Philippines and coastal Vietnamese waters in Gulf of Tonkin are unknown. Gray whales are known to occur in Taiwan Strait even in recent years. There have been unidentified sightings in Tokara Islands and Ryukyu Islands in recent years. It is also unknown whether any winter breeding grounds ever existed beyond Chinese coasts. For example, it is not known if the whales visited the southern coasts of the Korean peninsula, adjacent to the island of Jeju, Haeung Island, the Gulf of Shanghai, or the Tsushin archipelago. There is no evidence of historical presence in Japan south of Oesumi Peninsula. Only one skeleton has been discovered in Miyazaki Prefecture. Hideo Omura once considered the Seto Inland Sea to be a historical breeding ground, but only a handful of capture records support this idea, although migrations into the sea have been confirmed. Recent migration in Asian waters, even though South Korea put the most effort into conservation of the species among the Asian nations, there are no confirmed sightings along the Korean peninsula or even in the Sea of Japan in recent years. The last record in Korean waters was the sighting of a pair of Bangeojin, Ulsan in 1977. The only record in Chinese waters in 21st century was of a fully grown female being killed by entanglement in Pingtan, China in November, 2007. Most notable observations of living whales after 1980s were of 17 or 18 whales along Primorski Krai on late October, 1989. Followed by the record of 14 whales in La Paz Copyright Rouse Strait on 13 June in 1982. Since the mid-1990s, almost all the confirmed records of living animals in Asian waters were from Japanese coasts. There have been 8 to 15 sightings and stray records including unconfirmed sightings and re-sightings of the same individual, and one later killed in net entanglement. The most notable of these observations are listed below. The feeding activities of a group of 2 or 3 whales that stayed around Izuo Eschima in 1994 for almost a month were recorded underwater by several researchers and whale photographers. A pair of thin juveniles were sighted off Kuroshio, Kachi, a renowned town for whale-watching tourism of resident and sub-resident populations of Bride's whales, in 1997. This sighting was unusual because of the location on mid-latitude in summertime. Another pair of sub-adults were confirmed swimming near the mouth of Otani River in Suruga Bay in May, 2003. A sub-adult whale that stayed in the Ise and Mikawa Bay for nearly 2 months in 2012 was later confirmed to be the same individual as the small whale observed off Tahara near the Cape Irago in 2010, making it the first confirmed constant migration out of Russian waters. The juvenile observed off Oligocene in 2009 might or might not be the same individual. The Ise and Mikawa Bay region is the only location along Japanese coasts that has several records since the 1980s, and is also the location where the first commercial whaling started. Other areas with several sighting or stranding records in recent years are off Kumononada Sea in Wakayama, off Oshika Peninsula in Tohoku, and on coastlines close to Tomakomai, Hokkaido. A possible sighting of a grey whale underwater off Miyako Island in November, 2009. If this animal is confirmed to be a grey whale, it will make the first ever record of any grey whale migrating to the Ryukyu Islands. An unspecified sighting in Tokura Strait also exists. Possibly the first ever confirmed record of living animals in Japanese waters in the Sea of Japan since the end of whaling occurred on April 3, 2014 at Nodumi Beach, Teradomari, Niigata. 2 individuals, measuring 10 and 5 meters respectively, stayed near the mouth of Shinano River for 3 weeks. It is unknown whether this was a cow-calf pair, which would have been a first record in Asia. All of the previous modern records in the Sea of Japan were of bycatches. One of the above pair returned on the same beaches at the same time of a year in 2015. A juvenile and possibly another larger whale remained in Japanese waters between January or March and May 2015. It was first confirmed occurrences of the species on remote, oceanic islands in Japan. 1 or more visited waters firstly on Kazushima and Niijima for weeks, then adjacent to Mio no Matsubara and behind the Tokai University campus for several weeks. This later was identified as the same individual previously recorded on Sakhalin in 2014, the first re-recording one individual at different Asian locations. Whaling North Pacific Eastern population, humans and the killer whale are the adult grey whale's only predators. Aboriginal hunters, including those on Vancouver Island and the Marco in Washington, have hunted grey whales. Commercial whaling by Europeans of the species in the North Pacific began in the winter of 1845–46, when two United States ships, the Hibernia and the United States, under Captains Smith and Stevens, caught 32 in Magdalena Bay. More ships followed in the two following winters, after which grey whaling in the bay was nearly abandoned because of the inferior quality and low price of the dark-coloured grey whale oil, the low quality and quantity of whale bone from the grey, and the dangers of lagoon whaling. Grey whaling in Magdalena Bay was revived in the winter of 1855–56 by several vessels, mainly from San Francisco, including the ship Leonore, under Captain Charles Melville Scammon. This was the first of 11 winters from 1855 through 1865 known as the Bonanza period, during which grey whaling along the coast of Baja California reached its peak. Not only were the whales taken in Magdalena Bay, but also by ships anchored along the coast from San Diego south to Cabo San Lucas and from whaling stations from Crescent City in Northern California south to San Ignacio Lagoon. During the same period, vessels targeting right and bowhead whales in the Gulf of Alaska, Sea of Okhotsk, and the western Arctic would take the odd grey whale if neither of the more desirable two species were in sight. In December 1857, Charles Scammon, in the brig Boston, along with his schooner Tendamarin, entered Laguna Ojo de Libra, or later known as Scammon's Lagoon, and found one of the Grey's last refuges. He caught 20 whales. He returned the following winter with the bark Ocean Bird and schooner tenders A.M. Simpson and Kate. In 3 months, he caught 47 cows, yielding 1,700 barrels of oil. In the winter of 1859–60, Scammon, again in the bark Ocean Bird, along with several other vessels, performed a similar feat of daring by entering San Ignacio Lagoon to the south, where he discovered the last breeding lagoon. Within only a couple of seasons, the lagoon was nearly devoid of whales. Between 1846 and 1874, an estimated 8,000 grey whales were killed by American and European whalemen, with over half having been killed in the Magdalena Bay complex and by shore whalemen in California and Baja California. This, for the most part, does not take into account the large number of calves injured or left to starve after their mothers had been killed in the breeding lagoons. Since whalemen primarily targeted these new mothers, several thousand deaths should probably be added to the total. Shore whaling in California and Baja California continued after this period, until the early 20th century. A second, shorter, and less intensive hunt occurred for grey whales in the east and North Pacific. Only a few were caught from 2 whaling stations on the coast of California from 1919 to 1926, and a single station in Washington accounted for the capture of another. For the entire west coast of North America for the years 1919 to 1929, some 234 grey whales were caught. Only a dozen or so were taken by British Columbian stations, nearly all of them in 1953 at Cole Harbour. A whaling station in Richmond, California, caught 311 grey whales for scientific purposes between 1964 and 1969. From 1961 to 1972, the Soviet Union caught 138 grey whales. The only other significant catch was made in 2 seasons by the steam schooner California off Malibu, California. In the winters of 1934–35 and 1935–36, the California anchored off Point Dume in Paradise Cove, processing grey whales. In 1936, grey whales became protected in the United States. Western population, the Japanese began to catch grey whales beginning in the 1570s. At Koigiri, Nagato, 169 grey whales were caught between 1698 and 1889. At Tsuro, Shikoku, 201 were taken between 1849 and 1896. Several hundred more were probably caught by American and European whalemen in the Sea of Okhotsk from the 1840s to the early 20th century. Whalemen caught 44 with nets in Japan during the 1890s. The real damage was done between 1911 and 1933, when Japanese whalemen killed 1,449 after Japanese companies established several whaling stations on Korean Peninsula and on Chinese coasts such as near the Diao Bay and on Hainan Island. By 1934, the western grey whale was near extinction. From 1891 to 1966, an estimated 1,800 to 2,000 grey whales were caught, with peak catches of between 100 and 200 annually occurring in the 1910s. As of 2001, the Californian grey whale population had grown to about 26,000. As of 2011, the population of western Pacific grey whales was an estimated 130. North Atlantic The North Atlantic population may have been hunted to extinction in the 18th century. Circumstantial evidence indicates whaling could have contributed to this population's decline, as the increase in whaling activity in the 17th and 18th centuries coincided with the population's disappearance. A. B. van Dins points out the scrag whale, described by P. Dudley in 1725, as one target of early New England whalers, was almost certainly the grey whale. In his 1835 History of Nantucket Island, Obed Macy wrote that in the early pre-1672 colony, a whale of the kind called scrag entered the harbour and was pursued and killed by the settlers. Grey whales were described in Iceland in the early 17th century. Conservation: grey whales have been granted protection from commercial hunting by the International Whaling Commission since 1949, and are no longer hunted on a large scale. Limited hunting of grey whales has continued since that time, however, primarily in the Chukotka region of northeastern Russia, where large numbers of grey whales spend the summer months. This hunt has been allowed under an aboriginal subsistence whaling exception to the commercial hunting ban. Anti-whaling groups have protested the hunt, saying the meat from the whales is not for traditional native consumption, but is used instead to feed animals in government-run fur farms. They cite annual catch numbers that rose dramatically during the 1940s, at the time when state-run fur farms were being established in the region. Although the Soviet government denied these charges as recently as 1987, in recent years the Russian government has acknowledged the practice. The Russian IWC delegation has said that the hunt is justified under the aboriginal subsistence exemption, since the fur farms provide a necessary economic base for the region's native population. Currently, the annual quota for the grey whale catch in the region is 140 per year. Pursuant to an agreement between the United States and Russia, the Makah tribe of Washington claimed 4 whales from the IWC quota established at the 1997 meeting. With the exception of a single grey whale killed in 1999, the Makah people have been prevented from hunting by a series of legal challenges, culminating in a United States Federal Appeals Court decision in December 2002 that required the National Marine Fisheries Service to prepare an environmental impact statement. On September 8, 2007, 5 members of the Makah tribe shot a grey whale using high-powered rifles in spite of the decision. The whale died within 12 hours, sinking while heading out to sea. As of 2008, the IUCN regards the grey whale as being of least concern from a conservation perspective. However, the specific subpopulation in the Northwest Pacific is regarded as being critically endangered. The Northwest Pacific population is also listed as endangered by the U.S. government unregistered trademark as National Marine Fisheries Service under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. The IWC Bowhead, Right and Grey Whale Subcommittee in 2011 reiterated the conservation risk to western grey whales is large because of the small size of the population and the potential anthropogenic impacts. In their breeding grounds in Baja California, Mexican law protects whales in their lagoons while still permitting whale watching. Grey whales are protected under Canada's Species at Risk Act, which obligates Canadian governments to prepare management plans for the whales and consider the interests of the whales when permitting development. Grey whale migrations off of the Pacific coast were observed, initially, by Marineland of the Pacific in Palos Verdes, California. The Grey Whale Census, an official grey whale migration census that has been recording data on the migration of the Pacific grey whale, has been keeping track of the population of the Pacific grey whale since 1985. This census is the longest-running census of the Pacific gray whale. Census keepers volunteer from December 1 through May, from sunup to sundown, 7 days a week, keeping track of the amount of gray whales migrating through the area off of Los Angeles. Information from this census is listed through the American Cetacean Society of Los Angeles. In 2005, two conservation biologists proposed a plan to airlift 50 gray whales from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic Ocean. They reasoned that, as Californian gray whales had replenished to a suitable population, surplus whales could be transported to repopulate the extinct British population. As of 2013, this plan has not been undertaken. South Korea and China list gray whales as protected species of high concern. In South Korea, the gray whale migration site was registered as the 126th National Monument in 1962, although there have been no recent sightings of the species in Korean waters. Threats. According to the Government of Canada's Management Plan for Grey Whales, threats to the eastern North Pacific population of grey whales include increased human activities in their breeding lagoons in Mexico, climate change, acute noise, the threat of toxic spills, aboriginal whaling, entanglement with fishing gear, boat collisions, impacts from fossil fuel exploration and extraction. Western grey whales are facing the large-scale offshore oil and gas development programs near their summer feeding ground, as well as fatal net entrapments off Japan during migration, which pose significant threats to the future survival of the population. The substantial nearshore industrialization and shipping congestion throughout the migratory corridors of the western grey whale population represent potential threats by increasing the likelihood of exposure to ship strikes, chemical pollution, and general disturbance. Offshore gas and oil development in the Okhotsk Sea within 20 kilometers of the primary feeding ground off northeast Sakhalin Island is of particular concern. Activities related to oil and gas exploration, including geophysical seismic surveying, pipelaying and drilling operations, increased vessel traffic, and oil spills, all pose potential threats to western grey whales. Disturbance from underwater industrial noise may displace whales from critical feeding habitat. Physical habitat damage from drilling and dredging operations, combined with possible impacts of oil and chemical spills on benthic prey communities also warrants concern. Along Japanese coasts, 4 females including a cow-calf pair were trapped and killed in nets in the 2000s. There had been a record of deceased individual thought to be harpooned by dolphin hunters found on Hokkaido in 90s. Meats for sale were also discovered in Japanese markets as well. Captivity. Because of their size and need to migrate, grey whales have rarely been held in captivity, and then only for brief periods of time. In 1972, a 3-month-old grey whale named Chi was captured for brief study by Dr. David W. Kenny, and then released near San Diego. In January 1997, the newborn baby whale JJ was found helpless near Los Angeles, California, 4.2 meters long and 800 kilograms in weight. Nursed back to health in SeaWorld San Diego, she was released into the Pacific Ocean on March 31, 1998, 9 meters long and 8,500 kilograms in mass. She shed her radio transmitter packs 3 days later. See also: Grey Whale Cove State Beach, Grey Whale Ranch. Footnotes. References. External links: U.S. National Marine Fisheries Service Grey Whale webpage, IUCN Read List listing for grey whale, Archive Images and video of grey whale, Society for Marine Mammalogy Grey whale species account. The short film The California Grey Whale is available for free download at the Internet Archive. Voices in the Sea, Sounds of the Grey Whale.